Greetings, information superhighway, and welcome to episode 5 of the Nail the Recruiting Process podcast. My name is Jared Zeidman, and I thank you again for joining me. I've now been a dad for 2 weeks. It's really exciting stuff. I have not slept for very long, but aside from that, this has been the best journey ever. In fact, Grandma and Grandpa are in the other room right now, meeting Miles for the first time, and I'm just escaping to tell you about this awesome episode that we have for you this week. Now, normally, right around this time is when we go into a user-submitted question. We answer that question, we segue into the episode. For this episode, we're going to handle things a little bit different because this episode is really focused on one very specific topic in the recruiting process. And that topic is parental involvement. So I'm going to actually start by kind of asking my own question, because this is a question that's going to be discussed throughout today's podcast with our awesome guest. And that question is, how are college coaches responding to more over-involved parents, both on the recruiting trail and then once the recruit actually matriculates and arrives on campus? And the answer is kind of on a spectrum or scale. There are definitely some coaches that I've spoken to that are fine with overall over-involved parents and open to having, constructive and collaborative relationships. But there are also other coaches that are not only uncomfortable with over-involved parents, they actually filter for over-involved parents during the recruiting process. In fact, only yesterday, I saw a college coach post something on social media, and I'm quoting this coach. His quote was, "Parents, you will not help your daughter or son earn a scholarship offer, but you may cost them one." And I wanted to talk a little bit more specifically with parents about some of the things that coaches are doing to evaluate quote unquote over-involved parents in the process. But I also need to acknowledge that, we didn't just get here by accident, and there are plenty of reasons why parents would want to be more involved with their kids' athletic experience, and I empathize with those reasons. So before we get into our guest, I want to talk a little bit about how we got here, because this whole concept of parental involvement can be boiled down to one very simple problem with a couple of factors. Here is that problem. Childhood has changed. Kids are going through more structured experiences with more consumerism and significantly more detail in terms of how their days to days are lived. And that structure and that oversight oftentimes puts kids in a collegiate environment if they go to college. And that's really the first time that they have this kind of sense of freedom. And I've seen firsthand, even going back to my time as an administrator before I was coaching, some kids really wild out on that freedom. Now, even though this whole environment is changing rapidly, the standards of what it takes for a college team to be successful have not changed at all. And there's kind of a collision between these two things happening right now. This is not easy. Being a college athlete is not easy at all. Being a college athlete takes a tremendous amount of work. And something very important that I think a lot more people need to hear and internalize is that there is a difference between wanting something and deserving something. Just because you want to be a college athlete doesn't mean that you deserve to be a college athlete. And especially with the level of structure, a lot of people don't really know where they stand as they navigate the process. And that standard being the same, it smashes some people when they arrive on college campuses because they've never experienced anything like it before. So now we talk about those two factors. And here are the specific two factors that I think lead to the big disconnect. And my guest is going to help bridge that disconnect. And I'm so excited for you to hear from her. We're going to call these two disconnects cost and connectedness. So the first one, cost. First, if you want to be a college basketball player, there is a cost affiliated with that there did not used to be. The average recruit plays AAU basketball, which they're paying for, travels to all these events, which they're paying for. Maybe they have a trainer, which they're paying for, And then they go on to play college basketball. And unless they get an athletic scholarship, they're paying for college. And by the way, one of the fastest accelerating costs in our country is the cost of college tuition. It is wildly outpacing the rate of inflation. And just to give you an idea, I graduated college in 2008, and the sticker price of tuition where I went has doubled in less than 20 years. There are multiple elite private academies at the collegiate level that are charging six figures per year for admission. So, of course, if everything comes at a cost now, including the development and structure of your child, of course you're going to want to have more skin in the game as a parent. That seems very reasonable. So we need, as college coaches and as a community of coaches all together, to do a better job explaining to parents, what does this actually look like once your kid arrives on a college campus? What is normal behavior? What is a normal interaction with a coach? What does accountability look like in a healthy environment? And what shouldn't it look like? And that education is not really there. And my guest is really going to help out with that. But then there's part two. And I can show you part two just as much as I can tell you about it. If you're watching it, you can see me holding up my cell phone right now. Connectedness is part two. Every college student has a cell phone in their hands, a smartphone that allows them both not only to communicate with their parents 24/7, which is not something that me, anyone else my age, or anyone else before us did when they went to college. The less my parents knew about the college experience I was going through, the better. Because if my parents saw all of my ups and all of my downs, my mom, who was nervous enough about me going away to school, would have flown through a roof. And guess what? That's what modern parents are doing. They see and are connected to so much more of your college experience, and specifically so much more of your turmoil, because we know that success is a roller coaster, and we know that the college experience could be overwhelming. But when every element of it is being broadcasted to your parents, of course they're going to freak out and want more control over it. I would too. When my son cries when I'm changing his diaper, I lose my mind. I'm like, oh my God, this is terrible. I got to find a better way to do this. I want to do this better. So of course your parents are doing that. And that's where I think coaches need to be more willing to meet parents in the middle. Similarly, parents need to step forward and say, okay, college standards are going to be different. These people are put in place to get my kid more grown as a leader, as a teammate, as a student, and as an athlete. And that's going to probably take work I've never seen before. So that mutual trust and that mutual understanding of intentions and where those intentions come from is what we're going to be talking about in today's podcast with my awesome guest, who IRL is one of my favorite people on this planet. Amy Reed is a super forward-thinking coach. I have always known her as that. I have known her as a coach that was always willing to be ahead of the curve when it came to stylistic innovation in terms of the way her teams played, both offense and defense, but also management and locker room innovation. And I'll tell you a quick story that I don't want to give too much of it away because you're going to hear Amy talk about this. But Amy, who played D1 ball at Marshall and was an exceptional athlete, then started coaching at the D3 level, and Amy gets hired to rebuild RIT women's basketball. And they're moving and progressing steadily, but they never really get over the hill. And then all of a sudden, Amy decides to undergo some personal changes in her coaching philosophy. And to say that Amy's self-driven changes made an immediate impact would be a massive understatement. She has 3 consecutive 20-win seasons. She makes a Sweet 16 run with her women's basketball team at RIT, and she fields a team that is basically a who's who of all conference players. And that list includes 3,000-point scorers on her team at the same time. One of them sets the team scoring record, so we have a record-breaking scorer, and a different one is an All-American and one of my favorite college basketball players I've ever seen. A great little footnote about that bunch: they love Amy Reed, and they love basketball. In fact, I have seen her entire team from that Sweet 16 run at a Final Four, watching the Final Four together. just because they love basketball and they love each other that much. That is a coach's dream. And Amy Reed accomplished that dream. She had an incredibly tight-knit team that played their tails off for each other and for their coaching staff, and she pushed RIT's program to new heights. But you can't stop a person from being forward thinking. And wouldn't you know it, now Amy is thinking about something else. She is thinking about the relationships that parents have with college coaches, which led her, and you want to talk about someone who's willing to take risks, which led her to stepping away from her incredibly successful head coaching position to found the company State of Mind Executive Coaching. And this company specializes in working with college coaches and training them to have introductory meetings and discussions with parents so that instead of being adversaries with the parents, college coaches can be allies to parents. Amy has done extensive research and work into the subject. She's already started working with other college coaches and their parents to incredible results. And now she's here to talk to you, the listeners, largely players and parents, about the best things you can do to avoid some shortfalls in this process. This is a 100% awareness episode. And in my opinion, this is a must listen for any parent who is navigating a child through the recruiting process. I have never heard this process spelled out the way Amy is about to spell it out for you. Much like all of our guests, you're going to learn more about her and her background first. Then you're going to learn her take on the recruiting process, and you're going to learn specifically a scale that you can move towards as a family to make your child more ready, not only for the recruiting process, but for the college athletics experience. Amy Reed is this week's guest. Let's dive in. Hi, friend.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. It is so good to see you. I will say it's a little bit surreal. As someone, that has talked to you a lot in a coaching capacity, it's very weird to talk to you with both of us out of college basketball coaching. Does it still feel like surreal and new and exciting as you continue to, chart this new journey?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great to see you too. And I'm so excited to be here. And I don't know if it's completely sunk in yet that you and I are not coaching anymore, but I know that we're both doing a lot of really great work. So I'm really pumped to be with you today to dig into that.
Yes. So to give you an idea, and our listeners have a little bit of a head start on you. You are coming in and doing this podcast with me right after a little bit of a primer, going over the data about college coaches and their views about parental involvement. And obviously, learning about your journey is going to be what connects you with our audience, but it's also very important to have this discussion based on, some of the data about parental involvement. Right now, it sounds to me like your key mission at State of Mind Executive Coaching is to bridge a more collaborative relationship between coaches and parents. And I'd love to know just kind of your attitude and headspace around that, and why you felt that now was the right time for you to fully transition into this role at State of Mind Executive Coaching.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been a high level athlete, basketball player, Division I, and then coaching at the Division I and Division III levels for like my entire life. So this is very, very much my identity, right? Over the course of being a head coach at RIT for 16 years, I found myself, like every good leader should do, evaluating my leadership style, making some changes, without moving away from the core of who I am inside. So that was a really great exploration. And I was very fortunate to take a program that never won and just kind of test out, okay, like what works, what doesn't, and really kind of come into my own as a leader, and really learned a lot in the first few years of what not to do as a leader. And I think I just sort of adopted some of like the old coaching styles, like old school coaching styles that I had, at Marshall and just like in high school and just in AAU and all that. And if I look back to that, I'm like, wow, like that fear-based leadership style really doesn't work. And it may have motivated me in the moment, but it didn't really prepare me to be the leader that I am now, or that I was, when I was coaching at the college level. So I did make a drastic shift in my leadership style about midway through my career. And then things just started to really, really take off with my team. And I really loved who I was as a leader. It was just, I really felt like I was being my authentic self. And then a lot of great things came out of it, right? Like we went to the NCAAs 3 times. We went to the Sweet 16. I had outstanding relationships with my players. And that was it just brought me so much joy in my job. And then the pandemic hit, right? I feel like that's just like the statement for a lot of things, right? And
Sure.
I was noticing that, and this is not a blame on the athletes, but I was just noticing that athletes are kind of showing up a lot differently after that happened, and that this leadership style that I embraced within myself, that I was still trying to employ, just really wasn't quite landing. And that felt
Mhm.
really bad to me. And so I'm like, okay, well, let me just change again, right? Let me just reflect and change again without leaving myself, right? And I did that, and I was noticing that the changes that I was making within myself were really starting to erode at my core values, and it was kind of a form of self-abandonment, I would say,
Okay.
of just like, wow, like I'm really changing the core of who I am to accommodate kind of where athletes are right now, which I'll, discuss in a little while, just from a standpoint of energy level and problem solving and self-empowerment and just taking ownership and having that self-led accountability.
Sure.
But I was finding myself doing a lot of like emotional labor with that. And so I had this knowing for the past 2 years that there was something bigger that I needed to do. And in order to do that, I needed to leave coaching. Because there's a lot of really great coaches that are leading the profession. And so the only way that I saw that I could help change that is from the outside. And that's why I became a coach, an executive coach, and State of My Executive Coaching came into being. And so now I'm working with coaches, athletic directors, leaders, even leaders in the higher ed space in K-12, to sort of like look at these challenges that are in front of us. And the only way I could do that was if I left coaching.
I really appreciate this insight because I think right off the rip, it's going to give our listeners a sense of how you think. And something I have known about you as a friend and mentor for, more than a decade now, which is crazy, is you are very introspective, but you're also very futuristic. I have found you to both be, from an X's and O's perspective and from a leadership perspective, ahead of the curve in a lot of ways. And you are often the first coach to try something. And I want to share this anecdote with the listeners. The most unflappable basketball team that I've ever seen was the 2016-2017 RIT team that you coached. And they were an incredibly talented group that clearly loved basketball and clearly loved one another. But the thing that was most impressive to me, and you know the story and I've shared it with you behind the scenes, is they played with so much joy that opposing teams often could not detect like whether or not they were even being serious. Like, I remember my team in warmups once saying to me, like, they're not taking us seriously. And I was sitting on the sidelines being like, oh, they really are. They are just in a flow state right now. And I think we're about to be like in big trouble. And something that is interesting about what you shared just now, Amy, is you talked about making some changes. And I think that 2016, 2017 year, at least in my experience knowing you, was that year where you made a lot of personal change and you saw this immediate shift in the way that the personnel on your team carried themselves and how that shifted into games. Are you comfortable, talking to our listeners, especially because a lot of them are players and parents, about, what that change looked like behind the scenes?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for saying that. That just always, you've said this to me multiple times, and it never ceases to hit my heart in a really special
Yeah.
way. So thanks for saying that. And it was such an amazing run that we had. and I'll never forget that. And I think, the specific changes that I made were 100% within myself. I was recognizing really quickly that I was a big part of the problem, right?
Okay.
I thought, again, as I discussed just a few moments ago about kind of almost being mimicking, I guess, for lack of a better word, the type of coaching that I had and being like really strict and demanding. And, that didn't feel good to me. It felt like there was a disconnect between myself and the players in terms of like relationships and just really getting to know them and understanding like what motivates them, what makes them tick, and all of that kind of stuff. And, I was, really confident with the X's and O's in that piece. And, there are always things that you can learn from that. But there was just something missing. And so I really spent a ton of time working on relationships and really, really getting to know and allowing the players to see, me as Amy rather than
Yes.
coached, and obviously still like keeping those professional boundaries, but like really being authentic with them. We had, this is a little bit silly, but we had, weekly meetings. I had this mini fridge in my office and I would just get all of their favorite drinks and they would stop by randomly when they're walking by for class. And the only rule was that we can't talk about basketball. Like, I want to know about you. I want to know about your life and I want you to know about my life. So there was just a lot of that stuff going on. The other piece was that, I sought out feedback from them, which was really difficult at first, about how they experienced me as a leader. And
Mm.
how I did that was I created almost like a 360-degree evaluation that was really specific to our organization, to our team. And I allowed them to fill it out anonymously like once a week from the beginning of the season. And oh my gosh, that was so hard to read. And I got really, it felt some type of way when I was reading some things about, but you know what? I'm like, okay, Amy, you asked for this. Like, this is an opportunity for you to kind of see maybe some of your blind spots or see like how people are experiencing you or perceiving you. And even though some of the stuff was hard to read, it was just really transformational. And me like looking at that and saying, okay, like how can I take this and grow as a leader? And how can I be the leader that my team needs me to be without moving away from, who I am as a person? And so I just think that that was huge. And I evaluated them as well, but it wasn't anonymous, obviously, because it was coming from me. So just
That's
that,
your job. Yeah, that
yeah,
makes more sense.
just that, like, it was just that vulnerability of like, you know what? I might get completely annihilated here, but I'm going to learn something.
Yeah.
And I did. And then with that, that created the trust within our organization that, hey, like coach really wants to know what I think. And she's going to make changes if it means that we're going to win more games, that means we're going to experience more joy. Right. And I was able to do that. The other piece is just kind of getting out of the way, right? Is just allowing them and empowering them to lead themselves and lead each other. We had this captain selection process. Like I have coaches all the time ask me, oh, how do you pick captains, right? And I've done a variety of things, but one of the tools that we used that particular year with that group that went to the Sweet 16 for those, and for those 3 years, we were like wildly successful. Is that I had them, if you wanted to be a leader, I had them apply for the job. So they had to do like a one-page resume of how they showed up as a leader in any type of space, whether it was in academics or whether it was like in the community or just in general. And so that was their application. And then we had this team meeting and presentation, and each leader that was applying to be a captain had like 5 minutes to present to the team of why they should be a leader for this team. That year I had 6 seniors. All 6 of them applied. They had the most amazing leadership presentations. I could not, in my right mind, not select every single one of them. And everyone was like looking at me like I'm crazy. Like, how are you going to have 6 captains? How's that going to work? But it just worked. And I did a strengths finder with them, and it just worked out that we kind of clustered them 2, 2, and 2. And they each had different responsibilities and different lanes. And they ran their lanes so well that I literally had to do nothing in terms of like keeping the team cohesive, keeping the locker room in check. From an accountability standpoint of, if you didn't show up for X, Y, or Z for whatever reason, you had at least 3 captains knocking on your door and saying, where the
Right.
heck are you? And so that allowed me to really focus on the stuff that I love, the relationship building, the X's and O's, the actually like the basketball piece. That why so many coaches are getting out is because so many coaches have to focus on all that stuff. Right. Which is great. I mean, that's part of our job. Right. And I love that part too. But when you're spending 90% of your energy working on the emotional component, like the mindset piece, the accountability piece, it's really draining.
Right.
So that, was really why we were so successful during that time
That's
period.
it's so interesting to hear you bring so many of your goals back to this has to be player led in order to be successful. And a lot of my favorite coaches in the profession that I've seen able to grow programs and achieve sustained success kind of have this ethos of when my team is really in flow and when my team is really functioning, I'm actually doing way less from a cultural component. It's player led. Because of my relationship with you, I've had the opportunity to see some specific strategies that you've used to make things player led. You just talked a lot about the positive results that come with team developed and player led values. There's one specific team value I want to ask you about, and I think it's extremely important, especially for athletes this day and age.
Yeah.
Most people, when they hear the concept of a 24-hour rule and they're in college, they think it has to do with being of age and drinking alcohol. Your 24-hour rule was different, and I loved it. And every listener should know, because this has been with me at multiple programs. I took this from Amy Reed. The 24-hour rule comes from Amy Reed. And as I understood your 24-hour rule, it was if you have experienced something that either violates the, goals of the program or is out of bounds in terms of a team behavior, or if someone has hurt your feelings or bothered you, or you feel a certain way about something that has happened with a coach or player on the team, you have 24 hours to bring it to that individual's attention directly. And if it's not brought in 24 hours, then the team consideration is that it wasn't important enough to be addressed. And the expectation is that you as the adult can kind of drop it and move forward. I would love to hear how the 24-hour rule came about, and especially for this younger crop of athletes who do most of their communication on this thing, why the 24-hour rule is so important to you.
Yeah, and thanks so much for reminding me of that tool, because it's been a while since I thought about it. I think that part of being a really good coach is providing your athletes with tools that they could take beyond the court, beyond the field, right? And this is no more than a proactive communication tool that I wanted to set our athletes up for success, almost like an emergency toolkit per se. And this would be effective in any type of relationship, whether it's your teammate, whether it's a friend, a partner, or a family member. Is just, what are we going to do when stuff hits the fan?
Right.
Right. And just having that plan in place, so you're not scrambling, and so that you're not operating from a place of like panic or anxiety when that happens. So basically the 24-hour rule is an agreement that just what you said, if any of those things occur, that you have 24 hours to reach out to that person and set up an in-person meeting where you can look at that person in the eyes and really kind of dig into like what the issue is and be vulnerable and have that conversation, because there's so much that can get lost in translation with texting. It's a lot easier to do that. And also, like, if it goes beyond 24 hours and it's big enough, that 100% impacts the team.
Mm-hmm.
And just being able to like give the athletes opportunities to build this skill and to have those difficult conversations is so critical, because I really believe that inability to have a difficult conversation is the number one problem with teams that are dysfunctional.
This is so interesting to me, and we've seen it. And I think if you are a younger athlete or maybe a parent of an athlete, maybe something that you don't see is when there is something as simple as a miscommunication that is not resolved, it can very quickly turn into a personal beef that manifests itself oftentimes in like a subconscious way on the basketball court. I have seen, and I wonder if you've seen something like this, Amy, but I have personally seen multiple scenarios where two kids that were beefing subconsciously didn't pass one another the ball. Was not a thing they intentionally did, but it's almost like when you're not on the same page as someone, you can be on the basketball court with that person and not view them as a viable option. Have you ever experienced something like that when you coached?
Oh, 100%. I experienced it as a coach. I experienced it as a player.
Mm.
When I played at Marshall, and not having the maturity or the awareness at the time of like, wow, this is really impacting the team if we don't have these conversations, right? The biggest way I've experienced it in coaching, especially in the past couple of years, is that you have your postseason debrief meetings, and then all the stuff comes out of like, hey coach, did you know this was going on? This was going on, and I'm sitting there like, no, I did not know this was going on. Like, have you not used any of the tools that we've talked about, So it's just like, it's in there that, the athletes know that it's an issue.
Mhm.
And then there's this gap between what they know and the awareness and what they're willing to do about it. And that's where all the suffering lives in between. And that's where all the dysfunction lives in between those two things. Right. And then at the end of the season, when we're unpacking it, I'm like, well, gosh, like I wish I would have known about that so I could have supported you in that. And so that really has been, like I said, one of the biggest issues is just the lack of confidence in being
Mhm.
able to like talk to somebody, whether it's in the recruiting process or whether it's about a problem or a teammate or just anything that's going to make them uncomfortable.
Mm. This is a really good opportunity to segue because we've brought up the C word. And every coach has a different philosophy on confidence. And while it is true that there are certain behaviors that coaches can do that can chip away at a kid's confidence, and coaches have to do a better job developing themselves and improving to avoid those behaviors, it is also true that if you are a player and you can't also control your own confidence and put yourself in situations to grow and protect your own confidence, and all of a sudden you just point the blame and say, this person impacted my confidence and this person impacted my confidence, that's when you sort of run that inconsistency route as a player. And that confidence component is extremely important. Something else that I think is so unique about the work you're doing is I think you're the first professional that's really shedding productive light on saying, hey, parents, you can impact your child's confidence too.
Yes.
So what
Yeah.
I'd love to ask you, as we dive more into the parent component of this and the parental involvement component of this right now, please explain to me why you feel that parents can be such positive assets to their children in their developmental process as athletes, specifically from that confidence standpoint. Why is that so important to you?
Yeah, 1,000%. Well, first of all, it is my sincere belief that confidence is an inside job.
Mm.
And that anytime you're looking out here in the external for things to help you be confident, that's when you run into to problems, because the external changes all the time, right? And what you have control over is on the inside. So I love how you said about the consistency pieces. If you're blaming somebody else or pointing a finger and saying, yeah, like that person's impacting my confidence or this environment is impacting my confidence, that very well may be true, but you have absolutely no control over that. So
Sure.
that's a lot of the work that we talk about with confidence with athletes is that, and confidence coming from reps and from just having experience and from preparation of being in situations where you might fail and fall flat on your face, and then you learn something from it, and then you're like, okay, next time I do this, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and then I'm going to become more confident because I know that inside I can do that, right? So I just wanted to put that out there first. In terms of parents, you know, it's like I hear so many coaches, and I was one of them. I was just like, oh my gosh, like parents are just out of control. They're just ruining their child's athletic experience. Like
Right.
there's just a lot, and that is a flavor of blame and a flavor of helplessness of just us voicing that, right? Of like, wow, we've got this really big problem, and throw our hands up and say, I don't know what we're gonna do about it, right? And I just thought, like, what if we took an approach of what if, and this is the most generous interpretation, by the way, which I
Mhm.
think is important sometimes when you're dealing with challenges with people, is what if the parents just didn't know how they need to show up
Mm.
for their child in this environment, right? In an athletic environment. What if they just didn't know? And what if we were able to give them the tools so that they could be better partners for us, so they could be more aligned with what we're trying to do? Because the fact of the matter is that athletes have two people or two sets of folks in their lives that they have the most contact with: their coach and their parents.
Mhm.
And when you're young and your brain's developing, you're maybe not as introspective. I know there's some young people who are very introspective and very self-led, and that's amazing. But it's very normal when you're young to look for a lot of external validation and a lot of external authority, right? We're trying to teach them internal authority so they can lead themselves, and that takes time. But if you have two external authorities with conflicting messages, the coach and the parent, there's no way that that child's going to be successful, and there's no way that child's going to be confident. So I thought, okay, let me figure out how to solve this problem from the outside. And I actually started it while I was still in coaching, of creating a 40-minute digital course, and so that coaches can feel really, really confident about giving parents these very specific tools so that they can be better partners for them, so that we can together work to empower young athletes to have more of that internal authority versus, oh, what do our parents think, or what does coach think? It shouldn't matter what we think. Like, what do you think about your performance? What do you think about yourself? What do you think about how you show up? So, yeah. So instead of us complaining about it, let's do something about it, because it is a really big challenge, and coaches are leaving because of it, but they don't have to.
You just said something that's even more interesting to me, because you talk about a parent's ability to positively impact children, especially in the face of what you and I have experienced, which is, college coaches constantly complaining about parents. There are specific components about the modern college experience that, we can't control this as coaches, but they've changed. First of all, social media and text messaging, and again, this cell phone has connected parents and players in a very different way than they have in previous generations. Like, something I think to myself a lot of the time, Amy, is how lucky I am that my parents did not see most of my college experience. That's one component. The other component is, unless you're on a full ride scholarship, the price of college has increased astronomically. And these are parents, these are constituents that feel like they have more skin in the game. Now, the other thing here, and I think the big thing that you mentioned, is the potential information gap. How often do you think, especially in your experience so far, that the parent wants to help but truly doesn't understand the how? And then we're going to dive into the how kind of with our next question. But I'm just wondering how often you're kind of experiencing that when you give the tools that these people are like, oh yeah, I can do that.
Yeah, and I gotta tell you, I did it with my own team this past year, and I did it with about 10 other programs. And
Okay.
the data that was collected after the fact was that the parent interference, if you will, was way down,
Wow.
way fewer problems, way fewer challenges. Just because even if you don't really buy into it, it's my sense that, okay, we had this training and we have like other touch points throughout the season and check-in points and things like that of, okay, when I go to say something or I go to overstep, now I know, okay, yeah, like I want to do this, but oh, I remember that meeting that we had, or I remember like what the values that coach, okay, I need to be a partner to the coach. How can I do that? How can I reframe this? And I'm not inside anybody's head, but I'm imagining that that's what happens. And
Hmm.
that's why the issues went down. Is just, it's kind of like you have to throw it out there, and if it sticks, it sticks. And if it doesn't, then, that's out of your control. But this is within our control to like lay the groundwork at the beginning of the season, so that when things come up, it's like that emergency plan we talked about, right? With the 24-hour rule. This is just another version of the 24-hour rule, but it's a lot more robust.
Love it. On the subject of that robust plan, having seen some of the inner workings of this, I am fascinated by the concept of an energy shift. And I am so familiar, especially working in coaching, with coaches talking in generalizations and, not necessarily focused on the how. Like, a coach might say to their team, we need to shift our energy from this to this, but they don't always really talk about the how. You have outlined a really interesting how in terms of shifting your energy. So I'm asking if you can talk our listeners through how you interpret the 7 levels of energy, and then more specifically, how can a parent help their child shift towards more consistent, positive, and productive energy with their team?
Yeah, so the 7 levels of energy is definitely not a new concept. And I learned it from the most life-altering leadership book that I've ever read. And I've read a lot of them. So this is like really saying something. And it was Energy Leadership, or the 7 Levels of Energy Leadership by Bruce D. Schneider. And I got to tell you, when I read that book, my whole world opened up of not only how I need to coach to others' energy, but how I can really control my own energy and like make sure that my energy is up and that I'm showing up that way as a leader, right? So the 7 levels of energy are from Bruce D. Schneider. And the crazy thing about this is that when I knew I needed to leave coaching and I knew I wanted to be a different kind of coach, like an executive leadership coach, right? I was trying to find a program to get into that was aligned with where, what I really wanted to do. And I had no idea that he had a school called IPEC. So I enrolled in IPEC to become, to become this executive leadership coach. And it just all started coming together. But just, kind of getting back to the energy shift and the 7 levels. Bruce describes 2 types of energy. You either have catabolic energy, so that's level 1 and level 2, or you have anabolic energy, which is level 3 and up, right? And 1 and 2 are the classic, like, victim, life is happening to me, like it's not fair, that type of stuff, right? And we see a lot of that with our athletes and with parents, right? When playing time, for example, is not where they want it to be, it's just kind of being in that space. And then level 2 is still catabolic, but it's more of like there's a little bit of feeling behind it, like you get angry or you blame or you point fingers, and it's a little bit higher than 1 because you show that you care a little bit and that you want to change it, but you're just not ready to. And it's different from the victim, because the victim is just like completely helpless. I can't do anything about this, right?
Mhm.
When energy starts to become anabolic, so 3 and up, level 3 is what I like to call the explainer, where someone calls you out on something, they hold you accountable, and you're like, yeah, I know. And then you might explain why you did it. But then you take a little bit of that responsibility, right? And then levels 4 and up, you just start taking more and more responsibility and accountability for yourself. And you're more apt to come up with solutions. Okay, this happened, now what? And you're able to flip the script a lot quicker because you're being more solution minded. And then, levels 5, 6, and 7 are like when we get into that flow state, and when just, everything is in alignment, like you're creating all kinds of like win-win situations in your mind of like, how can this positively impact myself and the team, so like I perform well and the team wins, right? Of thinking of how you can do that. And level 7 is just kind of like, all of us as human beings might touch level 7 like for like maybe 30 seconds to a minute. It's just not a sustainable
Right.
it's just not a sustainable place to be. And so that's kind of an overview of what that looks like in terms of how do you get athletes or anybody or yourself to go from that catabolic energy to that anabolic energy, which is what we're wanting, right? And it all comes back to the simple like concept in psychology of your thoughts lead to your feelings, lead to your actions, right?
Mhm.
And classic catabolic energy is all kinds of like negative self-talk, all kinds of negative thoughts that lead to the feelings, which, apathy, all different kinds of like those negative feelings, right? And then the actions are, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to sit here and be a victim. Or going to sit here and like blame other people for my problems. And then the crazy thing about that is that when I was going through this training and we were taking a really deep dive into what catabolic energy actually is, and we were kind of looking at the science and the psychology behind it, that was right after our lunch break. And in the morning, I was feeling amazing. Like I was feeling like cloud nine. I'm just learning all of this amazing stuff. And we had lunch and I was just so grateful for this experience and this opportunity. Then we started just talking about catabolic energy and studying it in the afternoon. And our trainer did a check-in with us and was like, how's everybody's energy level right now? 10 meaning like you're ready to go run a marathon and this is great. And 1 meaning you're just like dead tired. And put it into the chat. And there were 33 of us in the room. And almost everybody, myself included, was at a 5 or a 6. And I didn't even really know why. And then I was like, well, of course that makes sense. By just talking about this heavy, sludgy energy, it brought all of us down. And
Mm.
that's just like the thought, right? We're thinking about it. That's impacting our feelings, and that's impacting our actions, which I wanted to take a nap. I was like, oh my God, this is terrible. I don't want to sit through this, right? But then we started talking about and studying the anabolic energy, right? And what all that entails, which I kind of just discussed. It was just like I just drank 5 cups of coffee.
Mhm.
So it's just, I hope that articulates well enough of how important it is that you as an individual show up and make a choice to show up in that type of energy, because it is a choice. It really, really is.
I want to add something because I think this is really important. Not only do I think you articulated it beautifully, and I mean, I feel like I just learned a lot even from hearing this, but you also just inspired a thought in me, which is it is so important as a parent if you can help your child with this because of that energy drain that you just talked about. Coaches are trained to focus on the middle because they know that if they focus on the bottom, or if the bottom gets enough attention, especially when it comes to energy, the bottom has the ability, if you kind of visualize a tug of war rope, the bottom has the ability to pull the middle closer to the bottom. So you are constantly in this energy battle as a coach where you're encouraging your leaders and your top energy kids and your top energy staff members to focus more on the middle. And a lot of times this can lead the bottom kids, especially if they're in that victim mindset, to feel more like victims because they're not getting that attention. So I'm wondering if there are specific examples, where this talking back and forth about this, like, can you think about some times where someone that had that victim energy on the court almost became their own worst enemy because their energy wasn't the focus anymore?
Yes. So many, yes.
What a response.
So many examples, right? Oh my gosh, how much time do we have here? I'll say one thing too, is that we talked earlier about empowering our athletes to have internal authority and to be in control of how they show up in their own energy, right? And the fact of the matter is, unless you're like a super evolved human at 18 to 22 years old, you need help with that. Nobody gave us the tools to how to show up and how to have the right kind of energy and how to be a great teammate and how to overcome challenges and adversity with the right mindset. We didn't really have that training available to us when we were athletes, right?
Right.
So, I just think that this whole internal authority piece is so important because most of the athletes that we deal with don't have a strong sense of internal authority. So it is our responsibility as coaches and parents' responsibility to have that energy level raised up or in the middle, as you say, because they're looking to us for that.
Mm-hmm.
And if parents are in catabolic and we're in anabolic, it's a wash. It's a wash.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to win, right? So I just think that is one of the reasons why I created this program, why I'm helping coaches give the parents these tools, because I don't think parents really realize how detrimental the way they show up energetically is to their child.
Building on that, because I think showing up is interpreted a lot of different ways. And sometimes showing up can be as simple as what you say to your child post game. And something that I think is tremendous, having learned a little bit more about your course, is some of the talking points that you really encourage parents to have. Are you willing? I don't want to give away the game.
Yeah.
But are you willing to maybe share an example of hey, parents, don't do this. Instead, try this with our listeners?
Yes, 100%. I think that I even thought of this idea as I was thinking about how can we really get this message out there effectively, of having almost like a camera set up on the dashboard in the car and recording like post game or post AAU game conversations between parents and their athletes in the front seat of the car, and after like pre giving them the tools and post giving the tools so we can like compare. But
that's so good.
I think that first and foremost, it's your child's experience. It is your child's experience. And even though you're paying a lot of money, and trust me, I know, club sports, AAU, it costs so much money. To your point earlier, our schools that we came from, $75,000 a year. I can't,
it's insane.
It's insane, right? It's not sustainable. And with that comes the entitlement piece of like, I pay for this, so therefore I get to dictate how my child's experience goes. right? And so I really truly believe that is the mentality. However, that is really, really harming your child's growth and development and their ability to kind of navigate these challenges, not completely on their own. I'm not saying completely abandon them and just let them like figure it out. But there are some really specific questions and ways that you can show up on that car ride home that will actually help them gain confidence and help them grow, right? And one of the, I'll just talk really briefly about a couple of like areas that I call out of bounds, right? I don't care if you're in the WNBA and you're in the off season and you're going to your child's game, right? Don't talk about X's and O's with your kid because how you learned how to box out might be completely different from how their coach teaches them how to box out from just a very base like surfacey standpoint, right? So if you're telling them, if they're struggling with rebounding, for example, and this is just like a skill thing, and you're noticing that they're not boxing out the way you would do it or that you were taught how to do it as a WNBA player, right? Their coach may have taught them a completely different way how to do box out and they just aren't doing it. So then that comes in, that brings into play when you're talking about, oh, hey, like there's this way that I used to box out. Let me show you how to do it. Right. Then the child is confused of which external authority to listen to. Do I listen to the parent who I really respect and love, or do I listen to the coach who I really love and respect, or I like being a member of this team? And there's just this confusion and they don't have it within themselves to kind of take a look at, you know what, coach did show me how they wanted me to do it and I'm just not doing it. And so I can't just throw my hands up and say it doesn't work. Right. So that's one surfacey example I would say, but it's real. But it's real. It happens. Parents tend to give a lot of X and O advice about performance and things of that nature, and it's just not helpful because it doesn't align with the coach's values. Like think about when we have a coaching staff, how important aligned language is. Like if you're coaching a college athlete and you're saying one thing, and when you're working with Sahar, she's saying another thing, and then your other two coaches are saying something else about one thing, you're not going to do the thing. So
Right.
that's kind of the same concept here.
I love this thought, and I also think that we can build on this in a really productive way, because a lot of people that are listening to this are at their core looking for tips or guidance about the recruiting process. This is the first podcast truly that is this episode zeroing in on parents. So let's just say, and again, most recruiting processes differ in one way or another, but I want to kind of zero in on what we would call the quote unquote standard process. You got a kid that plays high school ball, AAU ball, they're running the circuit, they're trying to find their fit. For that lane, in that recruiting process, what should parental involvement look and sound like when these parents and their players start interacting with college coaches?
Yeah. I would say, and my answer to this would probably be different a week ago.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because, as I grow as a coach, a different kind of coach, right? The way that you empower individuals, I don't care who you are, is by really genuinely believing that they know what's best for them. Even though that young athletes' brains are still developing, they're 18, they're getting ready to go on to college. They're starting to individuate, right? They're starting to like get a sense of what they might want in their lives.
Sure.
Now, some of that might be a little bit like, naive or misguided. And that's where we can come in as parents and coaches to like be able to provide that guidance without dictating and telling them what they should do and what they need to be doing. What I would say is just the best way you can be supportive as a parent is to be there and to ask a lot of open-ended questions. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. It's just like questions that start with how, or like what, or like, hey, what do you think about this school? What about this school really feels like it's a place you could see yourself for the next 4 years, whether basketball or whatever sport is in the picture or not? Of just like getting curious with them, of like really digging into what does my child really want? And then, we can sense that when they're going off the rails and focusing on the wrong things. And that's when we can kind of like bring them back to, hey, you said you wanted this. You said you wanted a small school. You said you wanted D3. You said that you wanted a team that had a really great culture. What do you think about the way this coach shows up in terms of their culture? And then put it on them. To like ask them what they observed about their official visit when their coach was talking about their team, and just kind of get a sense of like allowing them to take more of the lead and just being there to ask questions and being there to support when it goes off the rails.
This is really powerful and also such a unique lane for you, Amy, now to be able to kind of both sides it, because I'm sure that these same kinds of input that you're giving to parents right now and how to redirect questions to their child and how to show up for these types of discussions with coaches and let their children take the lead. I know you're also really focusing with your business now on working with coaches on how to create those lanes, how to create those conversations, how to build collaborative relationships.
Yeah.
In the interest of that, I want to kind of close by giving you an option to, try this on both sides. So here's my first question for you. We'll come back with the second one in a second.
Okay.
Obviously, in our careers, we have recruited somebody where we really liked the kid and saw promise in the kid, but saw enough quote unquote red flags with the parents that we backed away from the recruiting process with that child.
Yeah.
What would you say right now to a coach that was, especially now that you've seen what you've seen, if there's a coach out there that's thinking about backing away, but they really like the kid and they see potential in the kid, what would you say to that coach right now, knowing what you know?
Oh, wow. I would say just based upon almost 20 years of coaching at the collegiate level, that this has happened to me many times. And I've gone both ways. I've ignored the ping. I've ignored that feeling in my body, like, oh, this doesn't feel right. And I've felt the ping or heard it or whatever, and I ignored it. Don't ignore the ping, coaches. I don't care how good the player is. If you're in the recruiting process and you're having an official visit and the parent is answering all of the questions that you ask the athlete and interjecting and like just kind of dominating the conversation, that's a really huge red flag for me. That means that child is not confident. They don't have internal authority. That the parent is going to be a problem for you, most likely for the next 4 years of your career. And is it really worth it? Like, what's the cost of ignoring the ping? The cost of ignoring the ping is that every single time I ignored the ping, I wished I hadn't.
That is so, what an appropriate way to answer that question.
And I will say this, Jared, is that, everything's unfolding as it should. I firmly believe that. And, I'm living a life of no regrets, no mistakes. Like there's a learning, right? And that those folks, even though it was a problem and it was like a really big pain in the butt at the time, that those people are our teachers, right? It's like, what did I learn from that? And as I got more mature in my coaching career, I didn't do that anymore.
Right. So now let's flip it. Now you're a kid and you're on that visit and you kind of get the sense, oh, okay, my mom, my dad are answering all of these things. What advice would you give that prospective student athlete with the parents that are and by the way, they might be doing this with the best of intentions. They're not doing this because they're malicious. They're doing this because they love their kids. That doesn't change the fact that they're setting off those pings. What would you say to that prospective student athlete?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think it just goes back to setting yourself up for success and having communication agreements before you even go into that conversation with that coach on campus. It's the same thing like as the 24-hour rule that we talked about. It's the same thing as the course that gives coaches the tools to give to parents of like setting yourself up before something happens, of sitting down with your parents and saying, okay, hey, what do you think about sitting down and being here with me while I come up with some really open-ended questions to ask this coach? And I think open-ended is key because yes, no, there's like there's room for BS and like wiggle room. There's a lot of ways you can talk around yes, no questions. But if you ask really open-ended questions, then you really get a sense of who that coach really is as a person and what their culture is like. So I think just sitting down and having like 8 to 10 questions that the athlete can come up with on their own. And if they're stuck, the parent can kind of guide that. But parents don't guide it based upon like what you want.
Mm-hmm.
Continue to ask questions of like, okay, like if you're stuck on this, well, what do you really want? What does the ideal look like? Like if you could have a blank slate and like paint like the exact environment that you want from a school and from a team standpoint, a program standpoint, what would that look like? And then just help them get really clear on the types of questions they want to ask. And then make that agreement. Athletes, make the agreement with your parents. Okay, like, hey, thank you so much for helping me with these questions. I'm planning on sticking to this script. It would really mean a lot for me if you would just like be there with me and sit there and allow me to take the lead. And then, things happen, emotions come up, or like, the good intentions come in and the parent might have, I'm not saying don't ask any questions as a
Mm-hmm.
parent. I'm not saying that at all. But anytime you get out of your lane and you answer questions for your child, or, you might ask something that's serving you versus what serves them, that's when you know that you should probably keep your mouth shut. And then I just think too, like as a final thing is like maybe even working into that agreement, some kind of nonverbal cue that if the parent starts doing that, that the child can in a safe way, the athlete can in a safe way, like, give them a little elbow jab or a look or something. And that's their cue to, hey, I'm going to go get a drink really quick. I'll be right back and have fun with your conversation.
There is something I want to add, and I think it feels like a good way to kind of close the podcast with this, because I can say this to you anecdotally. I was blown away in the surveying that I did of college coaches by how many college coaches were willing to move a kid up their board if that kid was taking the initiative in their process. And, what I would say is, for anybody listening, I think what you've been saying is so extremely valuable. I'll get into the why in a second. But if for whatever reason you were on the fence about it, let me just drive that point home by saying to you that college coaches are on the lookout for kids that are, through their correspondence and through their interpersonal interactions, both on visits in person and on the phone, that the kids are clearly in the driver's seat. That means a lot to college coaches. Now I want to give you your flowers, Amy, because
Oh, sure.
I think what you are doing is so important because, part of, in my opinion, part of being forward thinking and really being able to identify what comes next is taking a real look at what a problem in modern higher ed is. And a real problem in modern higher ed is that the way that young people K through 12 live their everyday lives have changed drastically. They have more structure in everything they do. The idea of park ball is a foreign concept to most of these kids. They play club, they play AAU. Everything is organized. The table is set for them. They have every opportunity to be a big fish. The moment you cross over to college, nothing has changed. Maybe the apparatuses of how we teach has changed, but the standards haven't changed. And certainly in addition to the standards not changing, what it actually takes to succeed, both as a student and as an athlete, the grit, the resilience, the discipline, that hasn't changed at all. And I think what you are doing is you are giving people the tools to, in a more collaborative, and, by collaborative, I really mean healthy, in a more healthy way, tackle these problems as a family unit as they navigate them. So with that said, please tell our listeners how they can find you. Plug your stuff, Amy Reed. How can you be found, and what services are you currently offering right now?
Yes, you can find me at stateofmindexecutivecoaching.com. And on my website, there is a direct link to purchase my digital course, Raising Winners. And this is the course for coaches or athletic directors or club directors to run the best preseason meeting that you'll ever run, where you feel really confident that you're giving parents tools to be allies versus adversaries for you and for your program. Because we all, let's face it, we all want the same things. Like, it's so wild to me that coaches And parents want the same things for their child or for their athlete, is for them to be successful and great people and leaders. We just have two different approaches. And if we can align those approaches, wow, like our athletes will be unstoppable and confident and just be able to really excel at really anything they do. So yeah, just visit me on my website. There's a lot of other information on there. Book a discovery call with me, especially from a coaching standpoint. There's all these resources available for athletes now, right? Which I think is incredible. The focus on mental health is on the rise, which I think is wonderful. And there are a lot of really great resources for athletes out there, and almost zero resources for coaches, which is why the burnout rate for coaches is so high. So, I worked with my own coach for over a year, and the great thing about her, besides that she's an amazing coach, is that she was a former Division I athlete and played overseas as well. And so it was good to partner with her, because I didn't feel like I had to translate my experience,
Right.
because she lived it. And I think there are just so few like coaches, like executive leadership coaches in this space that had my experience and like really get it. I've been on both sides of it. So if you're a coach and you want to have a discovery call, and you want to dig a little bit more into team culture and leadership and just how you can show up as a leader, because being a coach right now is one of the hardest professions. It's one of those professions that every single person has an opinion about what you're doing. I mean, if you're a heart surgeon, you're not going to have people calling you telling you how to do your heart surgery, right? That's why I think our profession is unique, is because we're constantly under the microscope and being criticized by folks who have no idea like what it's really like to live this experience. So that said, I just my intention is to serve the coaching community and to keep great coaches in coaching, and I'm happy to serve and do that in any capacity.
I resonate with people who live their mission. And Amy Reed lives her mission. I cannot thank you enough for being on this podcast. I would encourage anybody listening, coaches, anybody, to check out her stuff, because what she's offering is so valuable. And any change that she's asking you to consider is a change that I have watched as a friend of hers, her make to extremely successful results. And I think there are no better leaders to listen to in this space than the leaders that have modeled the way. Amy, as always, thank you again so much for your time. The biggest challenge I think I had was not doing a 5-hour podcast with you, but you're definitely coming back for hours 2, 3, and 4 on a later date, okay?
Yes, thank you so much, Jared. This has been an amazing conversation, and it was so awesome to see you.
That's going to do it for another episode of the Nail the Recruiting Process podcast. Thanks again for tuning in. I hope you got something out of today's podcast. If you'd like to learn more about anything related to Nail the Recruiting Process, the book, my work, maybe wanting to work with me one-on-one, anything under the sun, you're going to visit www.nailtherecruitingprocess.com. If you'd like to follow me on social media, you can follow me at Nail the Recruiting Process on Instagram, or at Jared the Coach on Twitter and TikTok. Both of those handles are just one word, no characters, no spaces. If you'd like to ask something of me directly, if you'd like a question that maybe you want answered on a future podcast, or if you have an idea for something we should talk about in a future episode, please reach out to me via email. I would love to hear from you. My email address is recruitinggear@gmail.com. That's the word recruiting, then the word gear combined. recruitinggear@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening, and we hope to catch you next time.